Fawr iawn. I'r rhain o chi sy'n ymuno rwan sydd yn live streamio.
For those of you who are joining us virtually, we've been voting for the chair. The vote is confidential. But there will be a full recording available of the meeting if you want to look at the result of the vote. I can confirm that we have completed the process, that Tim Jones was successful.
And
I just say thank you very much to everybody who voted for me. And it's an honor to be a chair of the Eryri National Park Authority. I know I'm following a long list of people who have done really well, and hopefully I can live up to the good work that they've done. And thanks very much to Edgar for congratulating me. We work together, I'm sure. Moving on with business. Do we have any apologies?
Okay, right. Chair, yeah, could I put a question to Ewan? Do we need a vice chair, as the current vice chair has now been elevated, so there is now vacancy for vice chair?
Yes, you're totally correct. There is room for a vice chair, but my intention was in the event of fairness and to ensure that it is fair, we give people the opportunity to nominate themselves, and of course we give people the opportunity to address the authority for 5 minutes unless we have an urgent need to actually appoint a vice chair. I thought we would continue without a vice chair until the next meeting of the authority, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with that explanation. I think that's fair. Okay.
I do have a list of things here that the chair's announcements. In other words, we do have a new member here today, Einir. Welcome, Einir from Gwynedd Council. It's good to see you joining us. Hopefully you'll enjoy sitting on this committee. Thanks for joining us. And members of Gwynedd Council, just like to wish John Pugh the best. He's had a new hip pretty recently, and it's good to see that he's been able to join us today. And hopefully you'll be back on the bike as soon as possible, John. Thanks for joining us. As far as Welsh Government members are concerned, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Tracy Evans. I know this will be Tracy's last meeting, and on behalf of the authority, I'd like to thank you very much for your good work and all your passion over the 8 years that you've been with us. And also we'll be starting on the process of filling this big gap with the government, Welsh Government. I'm not sure if the officers are going to defer it because there may be potential changes, so the process may take longer if the minister so decides. Thank you. As far as what I've been doing and what I've been doing as chair, vice chair over the past few months, on the 27th of November, we met Julie James, our minister. She was very supportive of the national parks, but the finance is going to be tighter, and it's going to be at its tighter since Welsh Government was established. Like I said in my address before she's going to help make it possible, but things are going to be really tight. And I went to the housing conference the following day, and we have some difficult times ahead of us. On the 23rd of January, I attended my first meeting since COVID of the national parks. Here in the past, there were several presentations to raise staff's awareness. The level of morale was very good. People were very glad to be able to be together, and I think it was a very positive experience, and they wanted to carry on with these types of meetings to ensure that everybody is on the same level of understanding. On the 26th of January, I was in the joint meeting, North Wales and Prefecture, and we looked at the finance of the joint committee. That was the only thing that was discussed during that meeting. We've moved on the HQ in Penrhyn to undertake work on the meeting room to make sure that the authority can hold its meetings there and its subcommittees as well. And during the next few months, we'll be holding some meetings there to see how it works rather than in the past, to ensure that we address the issues so that we can use it more often in the future. If required, two training sessions have been held by the government. One was on governance, and on the second, we had training on inclusion, and the third one will be on the 16th of February on nature and carbon. It's really worthwhile attending. There are things that can be learned. There's an opportunity to share experiences from our joint members from AONBs and of course the National Park. We're all a family of protected landscapes. It's coming from the government because we responded to the fact that and said that we don't have enough training from them and we don't have enough input to make sure that we're all on the same level and on the same level of understanding. So the nature and carbon one will be the most interesting one as far as I'm concerned, but I'll be away on holiday, but I would encourage all of you to attend. The most important thing that happened is that we had a letter of resignation from Emir on the 1st of February. I'd like to thank Emir for his hard work for 10 years. He's led the park very well, and we've been very lucky to have him. And I was on the interview panel as an observer 10 years ago when he got the job, and so glad that they made that decision back then. And of course, we now have the decision now in relation to recruiting a new chief executive. We were very lucky to have Emir. The process has already started, but to let you know, there will be a special meeting of the authority to delve further into this during the next few weeks. Emir has said that he's willing to stay with us until the beginning of the summer, and there may be some flexibility there. Of course, that person who gets the job will have to provide their notice, and thanks to Emir for his notice, and I hope that he enjoys his retirement when he does go, enjoys his life outside the park. Now I'll be passing on to Emir so that he can add to anything required.
Can I first of all ask if there are any apologies? Okay. We have covered that. There is one, Dilwyn. Owain Roberts.
Sorry,
Sorry, I asked Anwen. Arwen hadn't received anything, but thank you, Ifor.
Sorry, ond nyrfa fi 'di gael fi fan'na.
Over to you. I'd like to thank Tim Webb for applying for the chair. Could I just reflect? I'm on my 5th chair in 10 years, and when you consider the Kieran Roberts, he had 3 chief executives during his lifetimes. So thank you for the kind words, but there is a lot of work to be done before I leave also. And I'd like to make sure that you as members understand where we're going financially for the next 3 years before I leave as well. As the chair has confirmed, we had a staff meeting, the first one since COVID, so the first one for 4 years. Staff really enjoyed being back together. And I think it's more special because we're now working more effectively, but not seeing each other as much. And the feeling among staff was that they wanted it more than on an annual basis. So we'll try and do that. The chairs have met the board to discuss the financial situation, and the conclusion reached is that the paper will be coming to you in a working group to discuss the pathway that needs to be followed in relation to the financial matters over the next 3 years. And as the chairs indicated, the meeting room in the headquarters has been upgraded, and we had a meeting on Monday, and it's very promising as a meeting place. The Planet Pass parking by the parking app is coming back, and we will be bringing a paper after March to agree on the process for appointing a new chief exec also. I won't take any part in that, obviously. Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Do we have any questions from the public? Any questions from the public? No, no questions. It'd be nice to have some, sometimes. Any declarations of interest? Number 12. If I could declare that my husband is working in that item. And if we go back to the minutes of the 15th of November and the 6th of December, first of all, the November minutes, I'll go through them for accuracy first of all. First page, second, third, fourth, 5th and 6th. Will anyone propose that they're accurate? Joe, thank you. We have matters arising. Or do we have matters arising? No? Okay, if we move on to the 6th of December's minutes, very brief set of minutes. Is everyone happy that they're accurate? Thank you. Moving on to the actions. There is one item, E1. It's only one item. I think it's a good idea that it remains there for now, and as has been indicated, there will be an extraordinary meeting of the authority in March to discuss matters further. So it is important that it remains in place for now. Thank you. And then the first paper and the budget for the authority. Thank you very much, and congratulations for your appointment. It's a pleasure to present the first budget as the Chief Finance Officer for the authority, and unfortunately, I have to present with a deficit of 640,000. Unfortunately, but the report explains to you the steps to create the budget, and as you will see, what we are doing is an incremental sum of looking at last year's budget, looking at the adjustments and the changes, and the pressures on expenditure and opportunities for extra income, and to try and establish a budget for the year to come. The report provides some details of the situation that we're facing and the financial constraints upon us, and I'd like to draw attention, as you will see in 2.1, there is talk about a deficit of 640,000 in the baseline. There is a mistake in Appendix 1 that goes with that when we're talking about surplus. Unfortunately, you may have spotted it in the Welsh version. It says surplus. You may have, it is a deficit and not a surplus, so the word in the Welsh version needs to be corrected. The English version is accurate. You will see the main points that we've considered in establishing the budget is to put a provision for inflation in wage increases. The discussions with unions haven't started as yet in relation to what the salary settlements will be, but we've put 6% because we feel that it's a cautious or prudent figure to be put, and if things turn out, and if it's lower than that figure, it will mean that there will be less demand on the funds. An increase of 6% is about 350,000. So each 1% is about 60,000. So if the salary increases less, or say 5%, there's about 50 or 60,000 less required to set a budget. Plas Tân y Bwlch, you will see in paragraph 2.6, what we've done this year, rather than continue with we've predicted a deficit of 240,000 and have funded that from funds for 24-25 because of the situation and what will be discussed later in the meeting, which is, and that's why we have expenditure for Plas Tân y Bwlch from one-off reserves, because the situation is beyond then is not precise at the moment. And as far as setting the budget, the revenue, as indicated, there is a deficit of 640, but we're also setting a capital budget for the year. And as you will see in part 4 of the report, we propose to set up a gross capital expenditure of 1.376 million, which is funded from capital grants from Welsh Government and also a contribution from the revenue. And further detail is seen in Appendix 5. One of the key features in relation to setting budgets for 24-25 we've had to address is the use of reserves to set a budget. In preparing this report, what we've anticipated for 24-25 is that there will be a contribution of just over £1 million net from the authority's funds, and there's a combination of funds that will be used to set this budget, some for funding specific projects and others from the reserves that are available for the difficult period that we're facing to be able to set a budget. You will see in part 5 of the report that we intend to rely on 731,000 from revenue and 330 from capital. And further details are given in Appendix 6 and 7. In Part 6 of the report, we propose to set a levy as for 23-24 because levies are set on both authorities, so Cyngor Gwynedd and Conwy County Council, based on the regulations for 1995 regulations as explained in 6.1, and it has been tied to the grants that we received from the government. And because of the grants remains, the feedback, the funding from the authorities is apportioned accordingly. There is a heading 23-24. That's technically correct, but it hasn't changed for 24-25 either. And the figures are accurate. You will see in 6.4 that we're recommending setting a budget of £7,195,119. And then 6.4, there is a breakdown of that budget. Just over 4 million from the government, 1.3 or 1.4 almost from levies on the 2 local authorities. There is a contribution of just over 1 million from reserves, specific reserves, creating a deficit of £640,450. That has been set out in greater detail in Appendix 1. And Appendix 1 sets out the process as we set the budget. We start with a basic budget for 23-24 and then work ourselves through that to see what changes we need to address. Some are compulsory, for instance, the salaries. There is a salaries agreement for 23-24 there. And the park, as I know from experience in Cyngor Gwynedd and the local authorities, has set a salary increase for 23-24 that was lower than what was agreed in the end. So there is addressing that gap, first of all, before we look at 24-25. And we've put 6% there. That may be too cautious. And if the settlement is less, we can adjust. You will see that there is adjustments to structures and jobs saving 87,000. But there is also pressure. So the change in rateable values for non-domestic properties has started this year, which has put additional pressure of 48,000 on the authority, and we are expecting a little bit more income from the bank next year, about 72,000 more than was put in the budget, which will be of some assistance. And as far as the changes to income, different grants and projects, the LIFE grant is received in advance. That is almost 500,000 or over 500,000. And then the rest shows you the other changes. There's almost 900,000 to changes to capital projects from grants and reserves. So that reduces the expenditure. And you're looking at the difference between the basic budgets for last year, which was 8.3 million. By 24-25, it has gone down to 7.2 million, which is a significant change from one year to the next. And then Part 6 of the appendix shows a grant and other matters. And then there are details for all of the reserve funds that is funding that 1 million that I've talked about. And as you will see, there is a deficit of 640,000. The other appendices provide more detail in different formats, a bit more detail. For instance, we look at 2 and 3 side by side, And as you'll see, they come to the same amount, but the difference is that one shows how the expenditure is happening by service, and then Appendix 3 looks at the expenditure and on what the expenditure is spent and so on. Appendix 4, the same as Appendix 2. More information if you're seeking that. And as I've said before, Appendix 5 refers to the expenditure and capital for next year, and 6 and 7 shows again what use of the reserves is being made and explains what fund is being used. So the recommendation, what we're asking you to do today is to approve the revenue and capital budget for 24-25. That 6.3 details the formal notifications required for local authorities. Thank you very much. Any questions before we move on?
I've got an observation and a question, really. There are two observations. Sorry, the two observations are that when you look at the PLAS capital spend or the spend coming out of reserves, that's 40% of the deficit. So I think thinking forward to the next item on the agenda, it's important to bear that in mind. The second one in relating to that was supplies and services, which are shown into the sort of running costs of the authority page. And if my calculations are right, that's 18% of those costs. Now, the staff costs and some of the others, we have some constraints, but maybe in another context, that's an area that we need to think about further about how we do that. And I know it's been discussed in other forums, and I know that there's work going on behind the scenes in regards to the central purchasing. But when you see a figure of 18, nearly 20% of our costs to do with supplies and services, it makes me raise the question, is there wastage? What are the things that are going on in the background? And I don't know what work has been done in relation to that. There may be work, we may have done all that work, and that is what it is. But I just have a question in the back of my mind in relation to that. And my other area of concern is on page 15, which is in relation, yes, it was in 15, which was in relation to the reserves again. I noticed that there are 5 staff there that are being paid for out of reserves, and I'd like some further explanation because it seems a risky strategy to me to be paying staff out of reserves. There may be, again, a very good reason for that. But before those answers, and I should have said this at the beginning, I'd like to thank the staff for this report. In my time on the board, I've had trouble getting my head around these figures because of the ways they're presented. This has been fantastic. So thank you very much for the clarity of the report. It certainly helps us get a much better handle on how things are going. So thank you very much. But if I could have some response to those questions, that'd be helpful.
Dewi pwysleisio arwain ar hwn.
Ie, o ran y staff, staff. O ran y staff, ma' nhw...
As far as the staff, sorry, I can't hear very well. There is a real need. Thank you. As far as the staff that is coming from the reserves, they're people who are working on specific projects. So when we get the offer, we put the reserves in. But this is an assessment that we need to undertake with you as members. The work is exciting and forward-thinking, but do we want to consider that when we come to decide where we have to take away to create new opportunities and work for the authority? We need that discussion. But as I said, there is a working group in March to go through how we're going to cope with the next 2 to 3 years. We are discussing Plas Tenabulch today. The deficit is still 600,000, and our recommendation last time was that above Plas Tenabulch, we needed to look for 200,000. So we need similar figures in year 2 and 3 as well. For information, the other two parks are going into the next financial year in the same situation and don't know where the savings are going or are being made. And it's a discussion whether or not we can achieve in a different way, in the same way, or what do we stop doing? It's as simple as that. Thank you. As far as the other point raised in relation to the supplies and services, 18.7% of the budget, there is, yes, that is a very broad area of different expenditures under that heading, but accepting the comment, and we will look at the specific headings throughout the year as we look at the financial position moving forward. We will be looking at that.
Thank you. I'm happy to propose that we accept the recommendations.
Os unrhyw beth, unrhyw arall am unrhyw gwestiwn cyn da ni symud ymlaen?
Does anybody else have any questions before we move on? Okay. So do we agree that the authority accepts the revenue budget and capital budget? Are we happy to do so? Is that seconded? Everyone happy? Anyone unhappy? Second part is to agree on the levies for the authorities that contribute. Are we happy? Is that proposed? Can someone second? Anyone objecting? No? Okay, thank you very much. The next point we have is the strategy for 24-25. Over to you, Dewi, is it? I'll go straight to the recommendations if you don't mind, so that I can explain the decision that we're seeking today. This is a technical document. There are a few points that I'd like to draw attention to, but the recommendation, what we want to note is that there is no intention to borrow monies for capital purposes, but that there are limitations that we are recommending on a prudent level. We do need to be ready in case there is an emergency. So we can't say that we'll never borrow because we never know what emergency may arise. So we're asking you to note that there is no intention at the moment to borrow money. But in 9.2, we want to change the arrangements from 500,000 and the operational boundary of 100,000 for 24-25. So keeping the same limits as last year, and to approve no change to those limits, and that we don't proportion any interest payable to variable. And also we're asking you to adopt the capital borrowing strategy for 24-25 as outlined in paragraph 3.3 of the report. And we also ask you to note the contents in relation to the Prudential Code. And then to adopt the investment strategy for 24-25 as outlined in paragraph 3.5 to 3.14 of the report, and note the institutions listed in paragraph 3.7. So I've gone through the recommendations first of all because there are quite some technical things in relation to the wording, and I won't go through all of them in detail today. What's fair to say is that I'm happy with what is being recommended. It's reasonable, it's consistent with what's presented in the past years. And you will see that there is a lot of reference to the governance and the arrangements to deal with this strategy and to operate the capital strategy that is presented. And as you will see in 1.2, there are a number of factors. So capital expenditure, treasury management, investments for service purposes, commercial activities, liabilities, revenue budget implications, and knowledge and skills. So if you look at the strategy, it's a comprehensive document in relation to what you require. There's a lot of things that are very technical that you don't need me to go through. But one point to draw attention to is in 3.12, there is a table that shows the investments for the Treasury and what is anticipated in years to come. And what you will see, looking at the total, is that there is a lot of money that has come in for specific schemes, and we do anticipate that the reserves will reduce significantly. It was 11 million at the end of 22-23. We anticipate that it will be over 10 million at the end of the financial year. That's coming to an end in a few weeks' time. But you will see then how we anticipate that the investments will reduce. And by the end of March 2027, we anticipate that it will be just 3 million, which has an impact on interest received and so on as well. And one of the things that needs to be considered, some projects, there may be a need to borrow short term because of the project life, and we don't know yet. It'll be something that we need to keep an eye on in the few years to come. We're not talking about long-term borrowing, but there may be issue in relation to cash flow that will mean that we'll have to borrow for the first time that the authority has ever borrowed. And that is something to draw attention to. As mentioned previously, there is an affordable budgetary restriction on borrowing. So we have to put a boundary, and it has been 500,000 last year, and we anticipate that it will continue to be 500,000. There are statutory requirements on the authority in accordance with the SIPFA rules that sets the rules to prepare such a document. And we may not have to use them, but they are there, and it's important to be conservative. And then in 3.6, there is a list of banks. They're all familiar banks and housing associations. So we're restricting to those organisations and no one from that list. Barclays is our day-to-day bank as an authority, and we anticipate that that will continue in the year to come. There is talk about giving money to one building society and nationwide, and that's the only one that's big enough, really, in relation to the assets that we have as an authority. And part 5 may be of interest to you in relation to commercial matters. That talks. There aren't any investments for purely for financial gain. So they're there for providing important services as an authority. And what we mean here is that you're not purchasing offices in other areas of the country. Everything that you have as investments are to provide services. And 5.2, there is income, as you will see. For instance, the information centres and the Ysgwrn. And that's how we anticipate matters proceeding in the year to come also. So I'm not going to go through this in any greater detail for now. I've been through the decisions that we are seeking from you today already. But with this report and the previous one, I'd like to thank Sian and David for their support in preparing these reports. And thank you very much for listening. Happy to take any questions. I have one question. You've talked about the potential to make. Are the borrowing policies adequate to address any need to borrow? I'm assuming that they are. Yes, we've anticipated that they will be. Maybe a year from now, we may have to amend, but for now it's appropriate. Can I just come in relation to life specifically? This was one of the risks when we adopted the life scheme, because of the nature of the payments and that the payments were at the end of the policy. And at the time, we anticipated that we had adequate reserves not to have to go to markets, but the scheme has now been extended from 18 months. And that is the risk, that we're bridging that final 18 months. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone? From the authority? 5.3. The risks involved, Plas Tân y Bwlch and Ysgwrn, has been added to that as well. I know Plas Tân y Bwlch is on the agenda today, but what can we do to make sure that the Ysgwrn comes off that list? 5.3.
Ysgrifennu gyntaf dros awdr ariannol lle cyn y prif weithredwr yn sôn am y rheolaeth. Rheswm dyn ni'n sôn am
Chief Executive mentioned the financial side of things. Obviously, there are always going to be financial risks. We're not talking about removing those risks. The risks are inherent, really. What we're saying is, with the governments, we just think that there is a management board at the Ysgwrn. As a part of good governance, there is a management board there. Not that there are major risks. It's just that it's good governance and it's included in the statement. That's what that means. On the authorities' risk register, there are two risks relating to the Ysgwrn. One, that we wouldn't be able to maintain the collection, and if we, as an authority, were not able to preserve the collection, there is no financial risk to the Ysgwrn at the moment. I would be asking the board to consider the financial risk during the year. I just felt that we need to prepare now if we do have a financial challenge ahead of us. Anyone else before we move on? So the recommendation, as we said, there are 20 changes to 9.1, 9.2 to agree that there are no changes. Is everybody happy with that? Okay. Only bit proposed that we accept it. The second one is that we look at the borrowings capital strategy. Is everybody happy to adopt that? Anyone against? And the last one, to look at an investment strategy. Everybody happy with that? Anyone against? Okay, passed. Thank you, and thanks, Dewi, for that. So the next paper is Plas Tân y Bwlch. We've all discussed this in a working group previously. Besides the Einir, of course, but I'll give the reins to Emyr to take us through this discussion. The discussion gives us the context. As the chair has mentioned, we have discussed this several times and in the last working group as well. And the part of the context is the financial challenge and the report from Audit Wales and the way that the authority raises income and the basic question that they ask, is it this in accordance with the national park purposes that we still maintain resources like this? We did have a full discussion 2 weeks ago, and it was based on the considerations of the passport, and unfortunately, we are going to move on to consider the Plaza situation. In addition to the discussion, I'll come to that later when I discuss the recommendations. Just a note, really, the passport asked me as a chief executive to engage with 2 potential partners. We've had discussions with the 2 partners, one in the private sector, one in the voluntary sector. I have to say, both partners have come back to me this week to confirm that they're still considering it. But if we do approve going out, then we can open it out to different partners and partnerships. One thing I need to draw your attention to, as a part of the recommendation, we haven't been able to get staff. We were supposed to have interviews for house manager temporarily. As we're coming to the busier period, I am concerned that we don't have enough staff to run the service, but also to run the Plaza as a secure place. And we really need to take that seriously. We don't want to run somewhere that's not safe, really. And I will refer to that in the recommendations. As members and officers, we want to give Plaza the best opportunity, and we have agreed to give a specific window to try and gain a partner or to sell before we decide to close. We have looked at the obligations of closing. So the worst thing that you can do is to just close the doors on such an important asset as this one. We need to keep it dry and secure and warm. So I've noted that in the paper as well. So that cost is 76,000, but just to remind you what the revenue cost of last is, and that's about $250,000 a year. And we've also reported, on average, the requirement is 300,000 in capital. So the response to this is core to how we respond to the financial challenge. And so it's very difficult to move on with other things unless we have a decision on this. If we turn to the recommendations, before you consider recommendations, I can just draw your attention to 6.1, which is to continue the current business model for a period until the authority can formally consider its options on the future management of Plaza. And if we do so, we will still have to go out to look for staff. And so it may sound odd to you as members and the public that we're still looking for staff, especially if we agree with recommendations in relation to Plaza, we still have to have the staff in place. 6.6 is that the management team at Plaza monitor progress and reports back for the 6 months. I really do have concern that we are able to maintain the business, because we could have staff leaving, which is totally possible because that sector is there's a lack of resources in those types of services. And if there's long-term sickness, for example, can we keep the doors open? And if that situation arises, we need to either reduce the time that PLAS is open during the week or close for a specific period, or even close and bring an item in front of you as members to confirm the decisions. In my opinion, we do have the ability as the head of employment to make temporary decisions, but the long-term decision lies with you as members. Iwan, did you want to add anything? The only thing I would add is we've been very dependent on human resources to continue with the situation while we were looking for a manager. And I'm not very confident if we can continue with that arrangement because it's putting a strain on human resources. And so it's a matter that we have to consider as a management team. And those are one of the factors that we do have to take into consideration in relation to the decision on how we're going to run Plas Tenable for the next 6 months before we report back to you in September. And it may be necessary for us to have a meeting before then. I'll run through the recommendations so that you're aware of what you're considering. To continue with the business, in the discussions with the working group, we thought that it would be easier for any partner who wanted to buy the resource as a going concern rather than a closed business. But that would mean that if the authority goes ahead with that, we'll have to recruit temporarily. Did you want to add to that? Just to say that there is a risk in relation to staffing. If we fall under necessary staffing levels to keep it safe, then we will have to take the step of closing the Plas. We really hope that it's not going to happen, but it will be very difficult. Do you feel that we need a specific recommendation in relation to that? The wording at 6.1, we have to continue with the current business whilst practical for a period until the authority can consider it. And if it doesn't become practical, then Emir as a chief executive can make a temporary decision and call a meeting of the authority. Can I add another word? Practical and secure. I think it's important in order to be able to manage that risk. That's something for Emir and his team to do in managing that risk. So 6.2, to go public and invite potential partners. We all seem to be comfortable with that. And because of the time limit that we offer Plas Tenable on the open market at the same time. To promote Plas Tenable as a going concern, to allow a period of 6 months. 6 months would technically fall during the summer holidays. That's why I've suggested September, where we will have to make a decision. But we don't know what the proposals will be or what the interest will be in the meantime. And that the management team and that we convene the Plas board to consider the situation that we find ourselves in. And like Dewi said in the previous 2 items, use the 2 reserves to fund Plas for this year. Those are the recommendations with the amendments to the wording in 6.1 to include secure, practical and secure. Brian, sorry.
Before we vote, I have one small question, and that is on the open market. Are there any upfront costs in relation to that? Would the agent's fees be taken out of the sale price, or is there an upfront cost that And if it is, do we have any idea of what sort of scale that might be? Bearing in mind it's a big property that could be marketed worldwide.
We've
had two evaluators. One has a model fee and commission, and the other one has the model amount and the commission. Yes, that's right. There is a variation in the market. My advice would be, rather than, it's important that we get the best price for the asset. And so if a fee is payable because that's the best proposal, then we would follow that route. But we've not reached that point yet. We're on the journey, but we haven't reached that decision just yet.
I just wanted that on the table, really, that we could have a cost, but it'd be relatively small in relation to the potential gain.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I can see Louise's hand up before we go to Louise.
Yeah, I was just thinking about these recommendations. Do we have to choose one, or can we have a combination?
Dwi'n meddwl, Louise, da ni'n mynd trwyddyn nhw gyd, a maen nhw
I
gyd...
think we're going to run all of them and they're as a set together.
All right.
You don't have to choose.
So we're not going to
There is a
vote on which one.
recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
7 are as a whole. Any questions from members? This is something very important for the authority. It's a step that we're not taking lightly. Personally, I feel sad. I've had some brilliant times in the past, over 40 years. It's not something we're taking lightly, but you've seen what the financial situation is like, and you've seen where it's at with our business model. Any questions, or shall we move on to the recommendations? No questions. Okay, the first one, which is to continue with the current business model as is for a period, so that we can look into other options. If we want, we can discuss all of them together with the improvement, which is to continue with the current business model while it's practical and secure or safe. So if you want to propose the 7, you can vote on the 7. Can we have a vote on that? It's been proposed. Everybody in favour of all the recommendations? A motion carried. Anyone against? Thank you very much. A brave decision, but important in relation to the future of the class. We now
Croeso. Sorry, dwi'n mynd bach enw fe. Geraint, nice cael chi, Geraint.
and can we just make sure that there's a mic in front of Geraint, please?
The translator's asking to make sure there's a mic in front of Geraint, please.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Felly, mae gennym ni ar cynlluniau gwariant.
So we now have a presentation on commuted sums, expenditure plans. I won't go into it because there are people who know a lot more about this than myself. So over to you, Geraint, or did you want to introduce it? No, happy for Geraint to introduce it. Okay, thank you. Committed sums is a term for which is a term for financial contributions received by the local planning authority from planning applicants. In Eryri, most of them come from conversions under the LDP. We need to spend this money for the provision of affordable housing within the park, and the park needs to work jointly with partners in order to spend the money. In front of you today, there are two new schemes which will enable to spend quite a significant amounts from the fund. The first is buy to rent scheme that Gwynedd Council has. This is a part of the council's implementation scheme. Basically, it's a scheme that houses are bought off the open market, either let by Gwynedd Council to local people for affordable rent. Just to say, these houses are run by Adra. This responds to the lack of affordable housing and affordable rent for the park residents. It will mean that it won't be bought as second homes or holiday homes. There are high house prices in the national park, which affects the viability of these purchases and a contribution towards buying and repair into the council. Some will vary from each purchase, but it will be approximately, say, if 500,000 could be contributed, these can provide 5 houses by the end of the next financial year. The second scheme is from the Pemachno Housing Association. This community scheme was created in response to the housing emergency because there are real issues in Pemachno. It's really difficult for house buyers, and the number of holiday homes are reducing the opportunities to rent, and we're concerned about the Welsh language. The model is becoming more common, and it's a practical way of responding to the challenges faced. It's very difficult for community groups to have the ability to own properties. The partnership in Pemachno see that the main way of being able to assist the community is to giving the ability to establish community houses and enable them to raise capital to be let on the open market and let locally. And because there was the ability in the community, the partners are looking for finance in order to fund an officer which will work in order to deliver these aims. They are asking for a contribution of 20,000 a year to fund the job for 2 years, and Mental Health Conway will also assist with this. They are also getting assistance with Perthyn, which is a part of the scope of the Welsh Government in establishing the group. The two groups are in accordance with the authorities' protocol and the 106 agreements as well. The two provide an opportunity for the authority to demonstrate support for committed terms schemes in order to attract the housing crisis in Eryri. I'll answer any questions that you may have. I can see in paragraph 12 that it states that the money goes towards 44 houses within the park boundary. Am I right? Which is really important to us, of course. Any questions from members? Elwyn? Thank you, Chair. I could see that the money that we're offering is up to 500,000. How much is in the committed sum in the park? How much money is in there? At the moment, there's about 600,000 in the fund. When everybody will have paid, because people pay in 3 phases. In the end, it'll be about 900,000, but at the moment, there's 600,000. Okay, thank you. I'm going to propose the recommendation.
I have a question in relation to both of them, actually, but it's the same question. Will they both be tied, if you like, with a legal agreement? So if you take 12 with regard to the houses to be within the national park. That'll be tied in with a legal agreement with suitable penalties if that doesn't happen.
Awgrym cyfreithwr oedd bod...
The suggestion from the solicitor was that we put a restriction to let the national park know about this so that we can then discuss with the council. Under the ownership sold on the private market for a long time, but the restriction would help to manage this. So the restriction that you're talking about is to keep it in the public market. Yes, I'm not totally sure how the restriction would work. Do you know, Iwan? If it is sold, then the restriction is removed, and we have to park have to agree to the to that sale.
To ensure that the houses that are being supported are actually in the national park. I'm concerned that money would go outside the national park.
Yeah.
And you know, who knows down the track? The intention may be that, but we don't really want it going outside the park, and that should be tied in some way. Similarly with the Penmachno situation, we need some way of ensuring that the money is spent on what it should be spent on, and you know, penalties in some way if it's not. I'm sure that's been thought about, but I just wanted to be reassured that those sorts of things to ensure that money goes where the intention is and that there are penalties if it doesn't.
Unrhyw beth da chi'n gallu...
Wel, bydd angen creu rhyw fath o gytundeb, sy'n ni'n feddwl.
We will need to create some form of agreement, I believe. Yes, like Geraint said, we will need to create an agreement, and we'll need to take the concerns that have been raised in the authority today into consideration and ensure that there are conditions that will keep control over where the money is invested. Elward, I think we should support any scheme that helps keep the roof above our young people in the countryside. It's very difficult for any young people, and I think we should support any application to support our communities. Ivor, I'm glad to see this in front of us today. Brian has asked the question I was going to ask. What sticks in, there's still a stigma, of course, the affordable housing that needs to be changed, I believe, in general. We're working on the policy now in Conwy, and we're looking at housing for local people, which is a bit easier around the year than affordable housing. John? I agree with Eva. If there is a house being sold outside of the conditions, then 80% of that sale should come back to the park. It's important that that's noted in the contract. Edgar? I agree with you that affordable housing, nobody really knows what affordable housing means in relation to prices, etc. I second Elwyn's proposal. So we've had the proposal and the seconder. Is everybody in agreement with the two recommendations? Motion carried, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Anybody opposing? No? Okay, thank you. So moving on to the working group report. Emyr has got that.
Felly mae gen ni ddau gweithgor.
So we have two working groups and one other committee to look at. So just to accept these, and if there are any questions or comments, happy to take those as well. So the first one is the working group on the 18th of October. Everyone happy to accept those? Any questions?
What's the question?
Yeah, I've got a question, but I'm happy to accept them. But the question really is for information in terms of the Article 4 and the timetable, whether we're still on track really.
Yes, we are. A report has gone before is coming before the next planning committee in March. There will be a report. And then there will be an urgent report if necessary, if there is support to be operational by around May 25, I think. So it'll give us time. Thank you. Any further questions? If not, happy to accept. So accepted. And then the second working group is on the 6th of December. A report on plastic-free Wyddfa and the Carneddau. Any questions arising? Happy to accept. Thank you. And the final paper in this series is the local joint working group. Any questions arising from this? If not, everyone happy to accept? And other meetings, does anybody want to raise any matter from any other organisation? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for working with me to make sure that this meeting's worked so well. Safe journey if you're new. Harbour Plas. I don't think we need any decision, but it was a matter just in case it was included, and then I thought I'd let Tracy know, just in case you were wondering. And can I just tell you, Tracy, thank you so much on a personal level for your hard work over the past 8 years, and best luck. And that's the end of the meeting.